I'm so sick. Bro, pathetic.
Test.
Bro.
That Israel is the result of the Holocaust.
The Imperial
Bro. I'm streaming for no reason, bro.
guards found him hiding in the abandoned villa's wine cellar, clutching a small vial of poison in his trembling hand. This wasn't some common criminal or political rebel. This was Sporus, barely 20 years old, once the Empress of Rome, about to take his own life rather than face what the new emperor had planned for him in the Colosseum. But to understand why death seemed like mercy compared to what awaited him, We need to go back 3 years to when a grieving half-mad emperor first laid eyes on a teenage boy who looked exactly like his dead wife. What you're about to hear isn't just another tale of Roman excess. It's the most disturbing case of identity theft in human history, where the thief didn't steal. Others describe a brutal beating that left her hemorrhaging on the marble floor, while Nero, suddenly realising what he'd done, screamed for physicians who couldn't reverse death even for a god emperor. The woman who died that day wasn't just any imperial wife. Poppaea Sabina had been Nero's obsession, his muse, the one person who could match his grandiose view of himself. Contemporary accounts describe her as possessing almost supernatural beauty. Amber-coloured hair that caught light like spun gold, skin so pale it seemed to glow, and most distinctively, enormous doe-like eyes that Roman poets compared to those of Venus herself. But here's what most people don't realise about Nero's grief. It wasn't normal human mourning. When you command an empire of 60 million souls, when you've been told since childhood that you're descended from gods, when reality itself bends to your will, the death of your beloved isn't just loss. It's a personal insult from the universe. It's a boundary that dares to exist when you recognise no boundaries. Nero's response to Poppaea's death shocked even the jaded Roman aristocracy. He refused the traditional cremation, instead having her body embalmed with more spices than the entire Arabian Peninsula produced in a year. He had her corpse dressed in her finest robes and placed in a crystal sarcophagus where he could see her. Palace servants reported finding the emperor having full conversations with the body, setting places for her at dinner, asking her opinion on matters of state. The court physicians, those brave or foolish enough to approach him, tried to explain that grief could manifest in strange ways. But Nero wasn't just grieving, he was fracturing. Sleep became impossible without massive doses of poppy wine. He would wake screaming Poppaea's name, convinced he could hear her calling from the next room. Food lost all taste unless it was prepared exactly as she had liked it. He ordered her personal chambers preserved exactly as she left them, down to the position of her hairbrush on the dressing table. But the most disturbing behaviour began about 2 months after her death. Nero started seeing her everywhere, in the face of a young slave girl bringing wine, in the profile of a senator's wife at the games, in the features of prostitutes in Rome's seedier districts. He would stop mid-sentence during important meetings, staring at some random woman who bore even the slightest resemblance to his dead wife. More than once, he terrified innocent women by grabbing their faces, turning them toward the light, searching desperately for something that wasn't there. The imperial household held its breath, waiting for this madness to pass. Instead, it intensified. Nero commissioned hundreds of paintings and sculptures of Poppaea, demanding artists capture not just her appearance but her essence. When they inevitably failed, how could paint and marble capture a living soul? He would fly into rages, sometimes ordering the artist beaten, sometimes weeping like a child. Then came that fateful day in late 65 AD when everything changed. Nero was reviewing administrative appointments, a mind-numbing task he usually delegated, but was forcing himself to focus on as a distraction from his grief. A young freedman, recently promoted to a minor clerical position, was brought forward to be confirmed in his new role. The emperor looked up from the endless scrolls and time stopped. The boy standing before him, he couldn't have been more than 15, had Poppaea's eyes. Not similar eyes, not a passing resemblance, but the exact same enormous dark-lashed eyes that had captivated Nero from the moment he first saw her. The same delicate bone structure framed them.
Just before we get started with this one, I do want to address the fact that I recently covered Rasputin on another one of my channels, so we kind of thought, is it really necessary to do it here on Biographics as well? However, it has been requested so much that here we are. If you want to check out that other video, I'm going to link to that below as well. But for now, let's get into it. Grigory Rasputin was a Russian peasant who claimed to have mystic healing powers, and he even went so far as to say that he was the second coming of Christ. He formed his own cult and even manipulated members of the royal Romanov family into believing that he truly was a holy man. Once he had everyone wrapped around his little finger, he used his influence over the Russian government, and his decisions contributed to the downfall of the Romanov dynasty. For years, he claimed that he struggled between the forces of good and evil. Many priests believed that his powers didn't come from God at all, and that he was actually the Antichrist. Grigory Rasputin was born on January the 20th, 1869 in a Siberian village called Prokhovskoye. For years, Siberia had been something of a dumping ground for Russia's criminals, and there were a lot of prison colonies that were full of men doing hard labor. There were also people there who had been exiled to Siberia for their religious or political beliefs. It is one of the coldest and most difficult places to live, and survival there is a constant struggle. Rasputin's father, he was a peasant farmer and a courier, and his mother gave birth to 7 children before he was born. All of them died during childbirth or in early infancy, so he was actually the first to survive the harsh Siberian winter. As a boy, he claimed that he would have visions of the future and that angels appeared to him in his dreams. He knew things about his neighbors that he couldn't possibly know, which was enough evidence to make the locals believe him. He could heal horses who were sick just by touching them. Some villagers believed that he was the second coming of Christ and that he was simply touched by God. Others believed that he was demonic and could potentially be working with the devil. In his teens and early 20s, it would seem that the latter was true because he was apparently very badly behaved. He would drink, he would steal, and he'd generally just get on everyone's nerves. At 28 years old, he was married and had 4 children with his wife, who he met in a neighboring village. He had a reputation of being an abusive alcoholic and also cheated on his wife. One day, he stole a horse. When word got out that he was a horse thief, instead of facing the consequences, he galloped towards a local monastery for sanctuary and ended up staying with the Christian brothers for several months. They had convinced him to find God and change his evil ways. A man named Makary became his mentor, and he decided to actually join the order and become a monk. He abandoned his family in favor of traveling from place to place, evangelizing to various villages. Many historians believe that if he spent so much time walking through the forest of Siberia, it was almost guaranteed that he would run into a cult called the Klisti. These people were an offshoot of the Russian Orthodox Church, and many of their members would actually show up to a normal mass on Sunday and have secret meetings in the woods. They believed that salvation could only be achieved through purging sin. They would perform ceremonies where they choked one another and let go at the last moment so they would get high on asphyxiation. They spoke in tongues and would spin and dance until they felt drunk. They would work themselves into a frenzy and then fall to the ground. Then they would let out their pent-up desires by having sex with whoever was lying next to them in a massive orgy. Rasputin continued to travel and evangelize the Christian faith, but this wasn't your normal run-of-the-mill visit from someone with a Bible. These monk wanderers were not allowed to bathe, and Rasputin sometimes wore shackles as he walked to make himself feel pain on purpose. This was supposed to be an atonement for his sins. By the time he returned to his village to see his family and friends again, he was a completely changed man. His eyes stared on with a frightening intensity, and he said that his visions from God, they were stronger than ever. Even though he only just got home, he told his wife that he needed to use the basement as a meeting place for his religious group, where he continued to have orgies with his Klisti friends. One day, Rasputin claims that the Virgin Mary appeared before him and told him to go to St. Petersburg to help the royal family. The idea that the royal family could need help from a peasant man in Siberia was totally insane. So, well, how on earth did someone like Rasputin make his way into the royal palace? Well, it turns out that his mentor from the monastery, Makary, was actually the former religious advisor to the Romanovs. He was likely able to use Makary's connections to attract noble clients who believed in Rasputin's abilities, and people were simply amazed at his powers. Rich people, they were willing to travel all the way to his small village to be healed by him. Makary sent a letter of introduction to one of his friends in St. Petersburg, and Rasputin went on the long journey to that city. He met Bishop Hermogen and a high-level priest named Sergei Trufanov, who is better known as Iliador. At first, the men were shocked by Rasputin's disheveled appearance. He smelled truly awful, and his stare, it was terrifying. He was able to dilate his eyes at will, making them appear to be almost fully black. But once the priest saw his healing ability, he said that he must be a saint who was gifted by the powers of God. But Rasputin truly did not care at all about what people thought of him. He would pick his nose and eat it in front of dignified people and mock aristocratic women for their eyes. He actually became good friends with Princess Milica and Anastasia of Montenegro, who were nicknamed the Crow Sisters because of the shape of their noses. They were not Russian, but they still managed to marry into the Romanov family. They'd actually both been heavily involved in mysticism and the occult, and they both manipulated their way into marrying members of the royal family. They were often treated as outcasts by the rest of the aristocracy, so they bonded with Rasputin and took him under their wing. All of this was perfect timing, because Tsarina Alexandra Romanov had just lost her first spiritual advisor, a man named Dr. Philippe. She believed that he helped her and Tsar Nicholas have a son and heir to the throne after having only daughters. He claimed on his deathbed that she would meet another holy man very soon who would take his place. Almost immediately after this, the Crow sisters introduced Rasputin to the Tsar and Tsarina at a party. The sisters had been the ones who helped the Tsarina find her previous mystic. So when Alexandra learned of the stories of Rasputin's miraculous healing abilities, she knew that she wanted him to help her son Alexei. He was born with hemophilia, which is a condition that prevents blood from clotting. This means that even a small scrape can lead to massive blood loss. They never told Rasputin about their son's condition at the party, and it was a secret they had attempted to keep quiet. Alexandra was still considering whether or not she could trust this peasant from Siberia. But one day, Alexei fell ill and scraped his knee, and the bleeding was not stopping. Rasputin showed up out of nowhere to the royal palace, demanding to see the boy. He said that he had a vision from God, and that without him, the prince would die. In reality, he most likely learned about this insider information from the Crow sisters, but to the guards and the royal family, they were shocked, wondering how he could have possibly known. Once he was allowed to see him, he told the doctors to leave so that he could use his healing powers. Almost immediately, Alexei actually did begin to heal, and this was enough to convince Alexandra that he was truly a holy man who had magical healing powers. Modern-day scientists and historians believe that this was not magic, surprise, surprise, but that he was actually preventing the doctors from giving Alexei aspirin, which would thin his blood and only make his hemophilia worse. Within just a few months, Rasputin became a regular installment in the Romanov family mansion. He began to give drugs like opium, morphine, and cocaine to the Tsar, claiming that they would help him with his various ailments. They would get high together on a regular basis. The Tsar became addicted, which only made him want Rasputin to come by the palace more often. The Tsarina would get migraine headaches and suffered from anxiety, and Rasputin was able to take away her pain and get her to relax. Soon enough, the Tsar and Tsarina, they began to feel a dependency on him, and he started to visit at least once a week. Rasputin called Alexandra and Nicholas Mama and Papa, as if he was one of the kids. He began to pray with the children at night and tell them bedtime stories. This made the nanny very nervous because the oldest daughters were already beginning to go through puberty. One of the maids also claimed that Rasputin had raped her. However, the Tsarina trusted Rasputin so much that she accused the maid of lying and fired her. The nanny tried to kick Rasputin out of the nursery, but the children claimed that Rasputin was their friend and complained that the nanny was mean, so, well, she was fired as well. It was clear that Rasputin's claws were deep in the royal family, and he could get away with just about anything. Newspapers around St. Petersburg, they began to print stories about the incident, saying that Rasputin was very literally let into the princesses' beds. Rasputin lived in an apartment in St. Petersburg where his followers could come and have meetings with him. Women would all show up with a hot dish, and they had potluck-style parties. They gathered around a table with him sitting at the center. Rasputin would sit in silence, staring into space, when suddenly he would begin to mumble something. The women would immediately stop talking in hopes of understanding what he was trying to say. He would then grab paper and desperately write down whatever was on his mind. For some insane and inexplicable reason, this was incredibly attractive to these women. They believed that he was the second coming of Christ, and they would offer to go with him into his bedroom and have sex with him. One disciple in particular, Olga Lokhtina, had so much faith in him that she left her husband and children in order to live in his apartment. She forced everyone to address him as God. Witnesses opened the back door to see Olga holding his penis and screaming, "You are Christ, and I am yours." And whoever walked in on this unfortunate scene, well, they slowly backed away, shutting the door on their way out. After learning about this scandal, police officers were ordered to follow him to see what he would do. They reported that he would hire prostitutes on almost a daily basis and bring them into bathhouses. Now, you would think that if he was paying for a bath on a daily basis, he might actually smell good, but according to testimonies, he would bring a prostitute into a private room where they would both get undressed. He would then take his leather belt and begin beating the woman, claiming that he would beat the sin of lechery out of her soul. Then he would have sex with her and leave the bathhouse without even touching the water. He was once witnessed leaving a bathhouse and screaming at the demons that he could feel inside of him. He would say that he could see the devil in himself, and he said that there was a battle over his soul going on. Now, obviously this might sound like he was tripping on one of the many drugs that he happened to be taking. But remember those two priests, Bishop Hermogen and Iliador? Well, they happened to hear about Rasputin screaming about demons in public, and this was damaging their reputation since they were the ones who introduced Rasputin to St. Petersburg society. Hermogen and Iliador ambushed Rasputin to confront him about what he was doing. They accused him of using the devil to have these healing powers. Hermogen grabbed Rasputin by the penis and screamed that he was thinking with that rather than his brain. These two came prepared with a giant wooden crucifix which they used to beat him just about as bloody as he would beat those prostitutes in a bathhouse. But the power of Christ did not compel him. Rasputin tattled on them to the Tsarina, saying that they were trying to murder him. Hermogen and Iliador were then both sent into exile, and Iliador fled to Finland dressed as a woman so that no one could trace where he was going. At the same time, Rasputin decided that he needed a break from the city and visited his home in Siberia. It turns out that Iliador truly was trying to kill Rasputin, and he later confessed all of the details in a biography. He was convinced that Rasputin was the Antichrist, so he hired a disfigured prostitute named Kiona Guseva to kill him. She had been so abused by a former client that they had cut her nose off her face, just leaving a gaping hole. Iliador told her the stories of how Rasputin beat and abused other sex workers. She showed up to his village and waited for him outside of his home. Rasputin received a telegram in the mail and left the house. He needed to go to the post office to send a reply. It was then that he noticed a woman standing and staring at him. He decided that she looked like a perfect convert, so he walked over to give her some alms and preached the gospel to her. When she got close enough to him, she stabbed him in the stomach repeatedly. She was so insistent on trying to kill him that she even dug her hands into his stomach and pulled out his intestines. On that very same day, Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, and it was one of the many events that triggered the beginning of World War I. Instead of being by the Tsar and Tsarina's side to give his advisement, Rasputin was stuck in a Siberian hospital, healing from his injuries. After hearing the news of the impending Great War, Rasputin wrote a letter to the Tsar, pleading with him to not go to war. He wrote, "We will all drown in blood, the disaster is great, the misery infinite." But the Tsar did not want to listen to Rasputin. For the first time in his career, people were cheering for him in the streets, and they were supporting fighting for the glory of Russia. The Tsar left the royal palace so that he could fight with the Russian soldiers. Alexandra was all alone, and after Rasputin healed, he returned to the royal palace and became her right-hand advisor and Tsar by proxy. Over the course of 2 years, Rasputin personally appointed several ministers of the interior, but he was completely uneducated in politics, so the men he put into power were completely incompetent. World War I was devastating. Millions of Russian men died in this war. People were struggling to find work, and the cost of bread doubled. On top of all of this, the Tsarina trusted a madman. The entire country had had enough. The Russian people, they basically had no choice but to have a revolution. Even though he survived the assassination attempt, Rasputin's health began to decline, and soon enough, he could no longer heal people. He wrote in his journal that he knew that he would die soon, and he already had made peace with it. He believed that God was about to make a sacrifice in order to save the Russian people, similar to how Jesus Christ had died on the cross. He wrote to Tsarina Alexandra, "If one of your relations brings upon my death, then none of your family will remain alive for more than 2 years. They will all be killed by the Russian people. Tell your relatives that I have already paid for them in my blood. I shall be killed. I am no longer among the living. Pray and be strong." During a meeting in Parliament, one of the politicians actually called Rasputin a dark force and said that he was sick and tired of this dirty peasant controlling the country, and that he would personally kill him himself if the man was not taken out of power. Tsarina Alexandra's nephew was a man named Felix Yusupov, and he was one of the many people who wanted him dead. He heard a lot about Rasputin's reputation with the ladies. Yusupov was married to a woman named Irina, and she was considered to be one of the most beautiful women in the city of St. Petersburg. It was rumored that Yusupov was bisexual, and that the couple were swingers with an adventurous sex life. He invited Rasputin to join them, claiming that Irina had taken their open relationship too far, and that he believed that she was stricken with a sex addiction. He said that she needed Rasputin's help to heal the demons inside of her. After gaining Rasputin's trust, Yusupov met up with 2 of his co-conspirators. They were planning to assassinate him. The The men picked up Rasputin in a car and drove him to the Yusupov mansion, where they led him into a basement dining room. The table was set up to appear as though they had just had a large party. They told him that Irina was with her guests upstairs and that she would come downstairs later to have her healing ceremony. They encouraged him to eat and drink while they waited for her. With that in mind, they started to hand him tiny cakes and glasses of wine. Rasputin had no idea that all of the food and drink was laced with cyanide. 2.5 hours later, Yusupov could not believe that Rasputin had not dropped dead yet. He began to believe the rumors that he truly did have demonic powers and that poison would not be enough to kill him. He rushed upstairs and grabbed his revolver and returned to the basement, pointing the gun at Rasputin. The monk simply stood there, staring straight ahead. He did not beg for his life or show any sign of fear. He shot Rasputin, who crumpled down to the floor. The men cheered and then went upstairs to party. After some time into the celebration, Yusupov began to feel a sense of dread. He walked down to the basement with the doctor and leaned in to check for a heartbeat. Rasputin's eyes opened and he lunged at Yusupov. The doctor fainted on the spot. Yusupov pushed the demon off him and scrambled upstairs to tell his friends that Rasputin had come back to life. They ran down to the basement and he was gone. He had crawled up the basement stairs and was slinking his way across the courtyard. Yusupov shot him point blank in the head, and 5 other men pulled their revolvers out to riddle his body with bullets. They stuffed Rasputin's body in the trunk of a car and drove him to a river, where they shoved him in a hole in the ice. When his body was later found, his hands were up, as if he was pressing against the ice in an attempt to escape. There was even water in his lungs, suggesting that he was still breathing even after all of that. After hearing the story, people were convinced that he had truly come back to life again as a zombie. So, indeed, they dug up his body and burned the remains, but not before cutting off and preserving his legendary penis. Indeed, it is now on display in a museum in St. Petersburg. Soon after his death, Rasputin's prophecy really did come true. The entire Romanov family was executed during the Bolshevik Revolution, and Russia would never be the same again. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below. Do not forget to subscribe. We've got brand new videos just like this several days a week. So hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and you'll learn all about that. And as always, I'll see you next time. Aleister Crowley may just be one of the most interesting men who ever lived. He was a self-proclaimed magician, scholar, writer, and even an undercover spy. He was known as the Great Beast 666 because some believe that he was the Antichrist written about in the book of Revelation. Others believe that he was a genius and a visionary, and that the world would not be the same if it wasn't for his teachings. Well, today we're going to talk about the life of this legendary figure, and you yourself can decide if he truly was the wickedest man alive. In 1875, Aleister Crowley was born in Warwickshire, England, to 2 extremely religious parents. His grandfather had a successful distillery business, and yet his father never wanted to spend any of the money because he believed drunkenness was a sin. He became a preacher instead and passionately evangelized the teachings of a fundamentalist Christian group called the Plymouth Brethren. They taught young Edward to live life as simply as possible, and that men, they only existed in order to serve God. Any form of excess, whether it was spending money, dressing in nice clothes, or eating more than was absolutely necessary, was considered a sin, and the temptation to indulge in anything was seen as the work of the devil. When he was very young, Edward looked up to his father and wanted to become a preacher just like him. He obeyed his parents' every demand, and instead of going outside to play with the other children, he instead studied the Bible. As you might imagine, this did not make him a very popular boy in school, and he was bullied mercilessly by the other children. His father, he died of tongue cancer when he was only 11, and he was left in the care of his overzealous mother. Living under such harsh conditions on a daily basis made Edward very sick. The doctors said that he was so weak he would die within just a few months if no changes were made. Thankfully, his uncle stepped in and suggested that maybe the boy needed to live in the countryside. Edward moved in with his uncle and began mountain climbing and running through the forest, where he breathed fresh air. His uncle allowed him to have fun, which was a concept that had been completely foreign to him up until that point. He even brought him to pubs and let him drink underage and paid for a prostitute so that he could lose his virginity at the age of 15. After all, the doctors said that he might die soon, so his uncle wanted him to experience as much fun as possible with the time he had left. His health, though, it fully recovered, and he was sent back to live with his mother. But Edward had changed in his time away, and he was now in full-blown teenage rebellion. He knew that the Plymouth Brethren were to blame for his sickly childhood, and he rejected all of their religious teachings. He no longer wanted to be a preacher, and he wanted the free will to make his own life choices. He hated the idea that nearly everything that made people happy was considered to be a sin. His mother was shocked that her obedient son had changed so much in his time away, and said that he'd become the beast from the Book of Revelation. After arguing with her, he decided that if he needed to commune with the devil in order to live his life according to his own rules, well, so be it. He would become the beast that his mother said he was. One of the first wicked things he did was have sex with the maid on his mother's bed, just to spite her. When she found out, she fired the maid immediately, and the poor girl's reputation was ruined to the point where she could no longer work. The maid was forced into prostitution, and Crowley claimed that she became Jack the Ripper's first victim. He even said that he knew the Ripper personally and that he was an occultist. Later, he would write about his formative years. "I was in the death struggle with self. God and Satan fought for my soul those long 3 hours. God conquered. Now I have only one doubt left. Which of the twain was God?" When Crowley graduated high school, he was sent away to Cambridge, where he introduced himself to his new classmates as Aleister Crowley. He joined the chess club and was able to win several competitions. In 1898, when Aleister was 22 years old, he fell in love with a fellow classmate, Herbert Jerome Pollitt. Very few people in the school knew that Herbert had an alter ego dressing in drag in private nightclubs as Diane de Rougy. Crowley wrote love poems about Herbert, and they are filled with anguish about his wish to be with him. Clearly, his bisexuality was even more motivation to reject Christianity. In the eyes of the church, his love for Herbert was considered to be an abomination. After graduating from university, Aleister inherited the Crowley family fortune, and he could finally do whatever he wanted. He began to hire female prostitutes nearly every day, and he bought books on the occult. He was writing dirty poetry and publishing them overseas under a pen name. When he was in his early 20s, he found out that he was not alone in his fascination with the occult and the possibility that magic could be real. He joined a group of aspiring wizards called the Order of the Golden Dawn, which had famous members like poet William Butler Yeats and Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula. They claimed that they had translated ancient Egyptian texts, old grimoires filled with ancient spells, and Jewish mysticism from the Kabbalah. They believed that they could perform real magic, communicate with angels, and get to know their inner soul. When he showed up to his first meeting of the Order of the Golden Dawn, Crowley was wearing a disguise and introduced himself as Count Vladimir Svarev. He was still afraid that his family would find out that he was dabbling in the occult, and he did not want to ruin his reputation. No one was convinced of his costume, though, because he was a baby-faced youth wearing a false mustache and speaking in a terrible Russian accent. Later on in life, Aleister Crowley actually became a secret agent for the British government during World War I because he claimed that he had successfully infiltrated a secret society. Now, technically that's true, but the result of his spy career was probably more along the lines of the Pink Panther rather than James Bond. After he felt comfortable knowing that the Golden Dawn took privacy very seriously, Crowley admitted to his true identity. Unfortunately, it had already started things off on the wrong foot, and some people in the group found it hard to trust him. Despite this initial deception, Crowley took their teachings very seriously, and he was able to quickly move on through the lessons. The Golden Dawn wanted its new members to be able to get in touch with their inner soul before they were taught real magic. This was accomplished through a lot of discussions of philosophy, yoga, meditation, and mantras. They would write down their dreams in daily journals and interpret what they meant about their inner selves. However, there were some spells that they performed on a daily basis because they truly believed that they could summon angels to their aid. The lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram goes like this. In the name of God, the God of Israel, may Michael be at my right hand, Gabriel at my left, Uriel before me, Raphael behind me, and above my head, the presence of God. Crowley believed so strongly in the supernatural that he claimed that these were the early stages of a magical journey which would get him in touch with his guardian angel. He openly talked about his desire to call upon demons and the ancient gods. He incorporated psychedelic drugs into his routines because he believed that it intensified his spiritual experiences. This was all genuinely concerning to the rest of the Golden Dawn. Many of them were teetotaling aristocrats who felt that his ideas were radical, if not downright terrifying. The members did not want Crowley to rise in the ranks of the society because he was clearly interested in black magic, and they believed that he would use his powers for evil. There was a strict rule that no one could pay one another to teach them magic, but he managed to convince one of the members to teach him higher levels of spells in exchange for free rent. In his books, Aleister Crowley casually mentions walking in on his roommate as he was levitating, as if this was totally normal among the members of the Golden Dawn. In 1899, when he was just 24 years old, Aleister Crowley bought a mansion on the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland called Boleskine House, just so he could perform a spell called the Abramelin Ceremony. However, nothing actually happened. He never saw any angels or demons, no matter how hard he tried. Apparently, he grew tired of doing this ritual every single day. Operated psychic state, Gabriel believed that they could summon angels to their aid. The lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram goes like this. In the name of God, the God of Israel, may Michael be at my right hand, Gabriel at my left, Uriel before me, Raphael behind me, and above my head, the presence of God. Crowley believed so strongly in the supernatural that he claimed that these were the early stages of a magical journey which would get him in touch with his guardian angel. He openly talked about his desire to call upon demons and the ancient gods. He incorporated psychedelic drugs into his routines because he believed that it intensified his spiritual experiences. This was all genuinely concerning to the rest of the Golden Dawn. Many of them were teetotaling aristocrats who felt that his ideas were radical, if not downright terrifying. The members did not want Crowley to rise in the ranks of the society because he was clearly interested in black magic, and they believed that he would use his powers for evil. There was a strict rule that no one could pay one another to teach them magic, but he managed to convince one of the members to teach him higher levels of spells in exchange for free rent. In his books, Aleister Crowley casually mentions walking in on his roommate as he was levitating, as if this was totally normal among the members of the Golden Dawn. In 1899, when he was just 24 years old, Aleister Crowley bought a mansion on the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland called Boleskine House, just so he could perform a spell called the Abramelin Ceremony. However, nothing actually happened. He never saw any angels or demons, no matter how hard he tried. Apparently, he grew tired of doing this ritual every single day without seeing any results, so he wandered off to do something else. Rumors spread that since he failed to finish the ceremony, this unlocked the gates of hell. Years later, Jimmy Page, the lead guitarist of Led Zeppelin, purchased Crowley's home on Loch Ness. He claims that the house was truly haunted by Crowley's demons. Aleister Crowley's first wife was a woman named Rose Edith Kelly. When they met, she was a young widow who was engaged to a man that her parents chose for her. Crowley convinced her to elope with him instead, after only knowing each other for just one day, so that he could prevent her from entering into this arranged marriage. They ran away on a spur-of-the-moment honeymoon to Egypt together. Crowley brought Rose into a dark cave and began reciting his spells. He was reading from a book called Gotha, the Lesser Key. The idea was that he would summon an Egyptian god, Horus. He went through his chant when Rose's head suddenly fell back. She claims that in that moment she had a vision and heard the voice of Horus. Crowley was frustrated with Rose, assuming that she was playing a prank on him. He had been studying the occult and attempting to summon demons and gods for years, and they never appeared to him in any visions. He simply couldn't believe that it was possible for Rose to evoke Horus when she wasn't even trying. But she kept insisting that she truly did see something in the caves, and that the gods had been angry with him up until that point because of his arrogance. Still not believing her, Aleister took her to one of the museums and asked her to point out the god she saw. Rose walked right up to the correct image of Horus, exhibit number 666. After seeing this proof, they rushed back to their apartment in Cairo so that they could talk about the visions in private. Rose said that Horus had given her instructions on how to communicate with the spirits. She gave Aleister a spiritual ritual to perform. When he was done, he heard a whisper over his shoulder from the voice of his guardian angel. Iwas. The angel instructed him to write down lots of information over the course of 3 days, and he published this in a text called the Book of the Law. The most famous quote was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Basically, this means do whatever you want with your own life. Crowley was thrilled with this revelation, and when he returned to England, he told all of his friends in the Golden Dawn about the voices that he and Rose had heard in Egypt. Many were reluctant to believe him, and some were angry, believing that he had been tricked into actually communicating with a demon instead of a guardian angel. At this point, they were still refusing to allow Crowley to graduate to the next level of the secret society, so he visited the leader of the Paris chapter of the Golden Dawn, MacGregor Mathers. He explained the situation back in London, and Mathers seemed to agree that Crowley deserved to enter the next level. When he returned to London with his certificate from Mathers in hand, the other members, they still wouldn't accept him. So he snuck into the clubhouse and he changed the locks. The next day, he laughed at the men as they failed to get inside. Not surprisingly, he was then officially kicked out of the Golden Dawn. A year later, in 1905, Aleister Crowley took a group of his friends climbing on Kanchenjunga, which is one of the largest and most treacherous mountains in the world. They got to 25,000 feet, but one of the men on the expedition, a photographer named Jules Jacques Guillemot, was angry at how Crowley was treating everyone else on the crew, and he wanted to take over the expedition. The
I just fell asleep.
Dawn about instructed him to communicate with 100 spirits. She gave Aleister a spiritual ritual to perform. When he was done, he heard a whisper over his shoulder from the voice of his guardian angel, Iwas. The angel instructed him to write down lots of information over the course of 3 days, and he published this in a text called the Book of the Law. The most famous quote was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Basically, this means do whatever you want with your own life. Crowley was thrilled with this revelation, and when he returned to England, he told all of his friends in the Golden Dawn about the voices that he and Rose had heard in Egypt. Many were reluctant to believe him, and some were angry, believing that he had been tricked into actually communicating with a demon instead of a guardian angel. At this point, they were still refusing to allow Crowley to graduate to the next level of the secret society, so he visited the leader of the Paris chapter of the Golden Dawn, MacGregor Mathers. He explained the situation back in London, and Mathers seemed to agree that Crowley deserved to enter the next level. When he returned to London with his certificate from Mathers in hand, the other members, they still wouldn't accept him. So he snuck into the clubhouse and he changed the locks. The next day, he laughed at the men as they failed to get inside. Not surprisingly, he was then officially kicked out of the Golden Dawn. A year later, in 1905, Aleister Crowley took a group of his friends climbing on Kanchenjunga, which is one of the largest and most treacherous mountains in the world. They got to 25,000 feet, but one of the men on the expedition, a photographer named Jules Jacques Guillemot, was angry at how Crowley was treating everyone else on the crew, and he wanted to take over the expedition. The expedition was marred by arguments between Crowley and the others, who thought that he was reckless. They eventually mutinied against Crowley's control, with the other climbers heading back down the mountain as nightfall approached, despite Crowley's warnings that it was too dangerous. Subsequently, several porters were killed in an accident, something for which Crowley was widely blamed for in the mountaineering community. It was claimed that Crowley sat inside of his tent and tried to summon a demon. At that very moment, an avalanche came down the mountain. They screamed for help, but Crowley ignored them and he left them for dead. He later wrote that he had absolutely no sympathy for the unfortunate accident, even though many of the men miraculously survived. Aleister Crowley's marriage with Rose fell apart after the death of their first daughter when she was only 2 years old. Even though they had a second daughter together named Lola Zaza, it was clear that they were no longer in love, and Rose fell into a deep depression. They got a divorce in 1909 based on his own adultery, and just 2 years later he had to put her in an asylum for having neurological damage from her alcoholism. This tended to be a trend because most of the people who even attempted to have a personal relationship with Crowley ended up having their lives completely ruined. It's sort of a chicken or egg scenario. Did his belief in the occult attract mentally unstable people into his life, or was his wickedness enough to drive people insane? Crowley was not very interested in being a father, so he left his daughter in the care of boarding schools and nannies. He started his own cult called Thelema, where he taught the Book of the Law like it was the Bible. He started a commune in a villa in Italy that he called the Abbey of Thelema. Everyone who lived there was encouraged to do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. They took drugs, they had orgies together, and children were running around the grounds naked. One of the rooms in the villa was called the Nightmare Room, where Crowley painted terrifying pictures on the walls. He encouraged his followers to take LSD and stare at the frightening images until they completely lost fear of anything. The neighbors were shocked, and even to this very day, the locals say that the place is haunted by a curse. Rumor has it that the rituals became more and more intense, to the point where they even participated in bestiality and animal sacrifice. One of Alistair's lovers, a woman named Leah, had a nervous breakdown after this, and she went straight to the British press after she stated that one of the followers died after drinking the blood of a cat. The Italian authorities, they came in and forced the group out of the house and banned them from ever returning. The Abbey of Thelema is still abandoned to this very day, and as we said, people believe it's haunted. Aleister Crowley, he visited the United States to spread his message, and he inspired several people to practice the occult as well, including rocket scientist Jack Parsons and the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard. He taught them how to perform sex magic, which was the belief that in the moment of orgasm, their intentions could be heard by the universe. Unfortunately for Crowley, all of the drugs and sex eventually caught up with him. He became a full-on heroin addict, and he lost a tremendous amount of weight. In the 1930s, a journalist labeled Aleister Crowley as a black magician. After years of running cults and buying properties all over the world, his inheritance had finally run dry. He was living alone in a boarding house, doing whatever he could to get his fix and stay alive. He decided to sue the journalist for libel, even though he had called himself a magician and the Beast in his own books. He lost the case, of course, and he had to endure public humiliation. Many people never saw him in London again, so they spread a rumor that he had died from a drug overdose, all alone in his boarding house. They felt that this would be a fitting end to such a wicked man, but in reality, fate gave him a second chance at life. A young woman named Deirdre McClellan approached Aleister Crowley after the trial was over. She said that she had read all of his books and was a huge fan, and she wanted to have a child. Now, this level of admiration, pretty much creepy enough for most celebrities to run in the opposite direction, but Aleister Crowley, he was so desperate that he agreed to go home with the stranger. McClellan helped him get clean from drugs, and she stayed with him through the worst of his withdrawal. After he was healthy again, they had a son together who was named Aleister Ataturk Crowley. Little Aleister was Crowley's pride and joy, and he felt a lot of regret for the way that he'd acted in his younger years. After living his entire life trying to prove that people should be as selfish as they could possibly be, he finally realized that true happiness and fulfillment, they came from family. They lived in a house in Cornwall where they spent their summers on the beach. According to Deirdre McClellan, Aleister Crowley slipped into a coma just before he died. The sky lit up in a cacophony of thunder as the gods came to reclaim his soul. He died in 1947 at 72 years old. In reality, he died of chronic bronchitis aggravated by pleurisy and myocardial degeneration. His funeral was held at Brighton Crematorium, and about a dozen people attended, and Lewis Wilkinson read excerpts from the Gnostic Mass, the Book of the Law, and Hymn to Pan. The funeral generated controversy and was labeled a black mass by the tabloids. Years after his death, artists and musicians from all over the world started to read Aleister Crowley's work, and it inspired them to live their lives in the way that they wanted. Hippies based their free love movement on his writings, and even John Lennon considered him to be a hero, putting him on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. His motto of "Do what thou wilt" was inscribed on the vinyl of Led Zeppelin's album, Led Zeppelin III. David Bowie made reference to Crowley in the lyrics of his song Quicksand. His life was filled with outrageous claims, and without his attempts to shake up proper Victorian society, the world we live in today just may not have been the same without Aleister Crowley. So I sure hope you found that video interesting. Bit of a bizarre one, I know. If you did like it, give us a thumbs up. Also, subscribe. We've got other videos just like this. I think we're doing 3 or 4 a week now, so if you subscribe, you'll get all of those. Hit that notification bell so you do actually find out about them. If you're looking for something else to watch right now, though, I've got another channel called Highlight History. You'll find a link to that below. And as always, thank you for watching. This video is brought to you by Dollar Shave Club. Get a shave starter set for only
Bro.
Ron Hubbard made contact with Jack Parsons, and L. Ron Hubbard became very interested in Crowley's system of magical practice that Jack Parsons was also practicing, And together they began to design a series of rituals based on Crowley's famous rituals. Crowley's rituals were known as the Alamantra workings, in which he channeled a non-human intelligence that he called Lamb. Here are pictures of L. Ron Hubbard from the period. Going to pull up a picture here of the three together, because it was the combination of these three that led to what we see today as far as a profound amount of paranormal activity. Ron Hubbard made contact with Jack Parsons.
Hey, Ron, where is...
$5 and check out their great holiday gift sets. After that, the restocked box ships with full-size products at the regular price. Go to dollarshaveclub.com/biographics to get started. Some weeks ago, we ran an episode about the Vatican City-State on our sister channel Geographics, which you should definitely subscribe to. There's a link below. In that video, I mentioned one of the tiny state's most peculiar residents, and many of you asked me to expand on his life here on the Biographics channel. I'm talking about Father Gabriele Amort, the most experienced and prolific exorcist in force at the Vatican. Between the start of his career in 1986 until shortly before his death in 2016, Father Amort claimed to have exorcised 300 subjects per year. So let's get into it then. How did Gabriele Amort become a priest and, more importantly, an exorcist? Gabriele Amort was born on May 1st, 1925 in Modena, northern Italy. Amort was born on May 1st,
17, 18, 23.
1925 in Modena, northern Italy, now famous for being the home of Ferrari. Modena also had a high concentration of alleged witches and wizards, especially from the 15th through the 18th centuries. Some of them were just experts in herbal remedies, but they still had to face the local Inquisition active from the 13th to the 18th century. One of these occult individuals deserves a special mention, Father Guglielmo Campana, a renowned local priest. Campana was an exorcist, but also a womanizer, a sorcerer, and a necromancer. He was duly tried by the Inquisition in 1517. We don't know if young Gabriele was aware of these stories. What we do know is that he grew up in a household that was both religious and involved in politics. His father was an early supporter of the People's Party, a faction inspired by Catholic ideals and the precursor to the eventual Christian Democrat Party. In 1943, Gabriele turned 18 and he was drafted into the fascist army, but he went AWOL and joined a resistance unit headed by a Catholic activist. For the following 2 years, Amort fought against fascist loyalists and German occupation forces, rising to the rank of battalion commander within the resistance. That's equivalent to an army major, and had done all of this by the age of 20. It's reassuring to know that your local demon hunter was also handy with a rifle and a Sten submachine gun. Amort reported being arrested and sentenced to death more than once, but he always managed to escape. After the end of the war, Amort was awarded the War Cross for military valor. After returning to civilian life, Gabriele moved to Rome to study law. He also became active in politics. In 1947, he joined the recently founded Christian Democrats as vice secretary of the party's youth organization. The secretary in charge was one Giulio Andreotti, a controversial figure who later became a cabinet minister and eventually prime minister. But Gabriele didn't pursue politics. Since the age of 17, Amort had considered joining the church, and so after earning his law degree, he enrolled in seminary to become a man of the cloth. In 1954, Gabriele attained a second degree in theology and was ordained as a Catholic priest. During his first years in priesthood, Father Amort did not practice exorcisms, nor was he probably even aware of these rituals. At that time, the number of exorcist priests in Italy could be counted on 2 hands. However, Amort did dedicate himself to some of the most miraculous, supernatural, and even controversial aspects of the faith. A long devotee of the Virgin Mary, Amort studied the Marian apparitions in modern-day Bosnia. He firmly believed these to be true life events, a point of fact not endorsed or agreed upon by all clergy members. In 1959, he visited another site famous for miracles attributed to the Mother of Jesus, Fatima in Portugal. In a spectacular enterprise, Father Amort organized a pilgrimage in reverse. He arranged for a statue of the Virgin to travel from Fatima to all of Italy's main cities. His old pal, Andreotti, now Minister of Defense, assisted by loaning Amort some military transport helicopters. He's a good friend. During this tour, Father Amort took the statue to the convent of Padre Pio, or Minister of Amort, organ by all clergy members. In 1950, Portugal, his old pal, Andreotti, is a good friend. Father Pius, now a saint. This mystic friar is widely believed to have performed miracles during his lifetime, and after his death, he was also beset with stigmata, unexplained bleeding marks that appear on the ribs. Mystic friar is widely believed to have performed miracles. Friends. During this tour, Father Amort took the statue to the convent of Padre Pio, or Father Pius, now a saint. This mystic friar is widely believed to have performed miracles during his lifetime, and after his death, he was also beset with stigmata, unexplained bleeding marks that appear on the ribs, wrists, hands, or feet, matching the wounds that Jesus Christ received on the cross. It was Father Pio who first introduced Father Amort to the mysteries of the devil and its presence among humans. Often the Prince of Darkness would torment Pio, disguised as a huge, snarling black dog. While the friar prayed alone in his convent cell, the hellbound would attack him, forcing him into vicious, all-night-long fights. Father Pio died in 1968 and was canonized as a saint in June of 2000. Amort to the mysteries of the devil and its presence among humans. Often the Prince of Darkness would torment Pio, disguised as a huge, snarling black dog. While the friar prayed alone in his convent cell, the hellbound would attack him, forcing him into vicious, all-night-long fights. Father Pio died in 1968 and was canonized as a saint in June of 2002. During the ensuing years, Father Amort did not have direct contact with any demons. The closest he got was his acquaintance with Father Candido Amantini, who, for much of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, was the only sanctioned exorcist in Rome. But things were about to change. In 1986, Father Amort was 61, an age close to retirement for most people, and yet his true career was only just about to start. On June the 6th, 1986, Father Amort was summoned for a meeting with Cardinal Poletti, the highest-ranking clergyman in Rome besides the Pope. During a casual conversation, Poletti asked if Amort knew Father Amantini, the exorcist. As Amort answered that yes, he had met him previously, he noticed that Poletti was scribbling on a piece of paper. At the end of the conversation, the cardinal handed him a note. It was an official appointment as assistant to Amantini. And just like that, Amort had become assistant exorcist for Rome, which essentially made him the deputy chief exorcist of the Vatican. He understood immediately that he was going to become more than an assistant. He would soon become Amantini's successor, as the current chief exorcist was in poor health. Amantini held on for another 6 years, dying in September 1992. From 1986 to 1992, Amort learned from his mentor all the tricks of that terrifying trade that is the casting away of demons. I'll now ask you to step into Gabriella's shoes as I take the role of Amantini and take you through a quick apprenticeship of how to become a demon slayer. First lesson, what is possession? According to the official Catholic Catechism, demonic possession is the act by which the devil, a demon or a spirit, takes over a victim's physical activity as well as their mental and spiritual energies. By exerting physical violence upon the hosts, which manifests for the victim as illness or pain, the demon can coerce humans into committing unholy sins. So what exactly is the ultimate goal of these malignant entities? In most cases, it's just to spread chaos for the sheer pleasure of it. The possession cases that Amantini and Amort involved themselves in mainly belonged to a category defined as peripheral pathogenic. By modern anthropology. Anthropologist I.M. Lewis makes a distinction between central and peripheral types of possession. In the case of central possession, a member of the religious elite becomes possessed by spirits during an official ceremony in which he or she fulfills a political, religious, or moral function. Peripheral possession, on the other hand, indicates an invasion of evil spirits, unwanted, immoral, dangerous. Anthropologist Emma Cohen further subclassifies peripheral possession into executive and pathogenic. Executive possessions involve the complete replacement or transformation of the host's personality with that of the invading entity. In pathogenic cases, the spirit or demon will cause abnormative possessions involve the complete replacement or transformation of the host's personality with that of the invading entity. In pathogenic cases, the spirit or demon will cause abnormal and deviant behavior, illness, pain, or misfortune to the victims while their identity is largely intact. It's the alternating of normal and abnormal behavior that leads the victim's social circle to seek help. The world's largest religions all have their interpretations of what entities may cause these peripheral pathogenic possessions. According to the Talmud, a sacred book of Jewish tradition, possession is called dibuk. This is when the soul of a dead person is grafted onto a living person's soul. In Islam, those who are greedy for earthly pleasures, have low self-esteem, or struggle for acceptance may be possessed by a jinn. According to the Quran, these are entities made of smokeless, scorching fire and are not necessarily malevolent. In Hindu lore, unwelcome possessions manifest as physical or mental illnesses, mainly affecting women and children. These are caused by a number of evil forces such as Bhutas or ghosts, curtails, blood-sucking witches, pisakas, flesh-eating demons, and, well, many more. Going back to Catholicism, the Catechism identifies possessing entities as either the devil himself or, much more commonly, his demons. These are fallen angels, which means that their strength, intellect, knowledge, and cunning are superior to that of humans. Nonetheless, they are still God's creatures and are ultimately subject to his will. That's why an ordained member of the church can perform exorcisms. These are simply defined as acts or rites by which priests use their authority to demand that a person or even an object is rid of the influence of evil. Father Amentini introduced his pupil, Gabriella, to the strictly codified procedures to conduct an exorcism, as defined by ecclesiastical law and the Roman ritual. This is the official collection of sacred rites and prayers to be used during the sacraments. But before you can start to exorcise a patient, how can you be sure that a demon is lurking within? Well, just before we get into all of that, I just want to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, Dollar Shave Club. So you might think it a bit odd that I would advertise a shaving company, because clearly I have a beard, but I still have to shave. I just shave my head instead. So I used to use an electric expensive, all there. Anyway, we'll launch the holiday season, sure if I'm there or that, or just buy. Check out those holiday gift sets. Once you've started, a restock box ships with full-size products later at the regular price. Let's get back to it. Amort learns how to approach every potential case of possession with a process called discernment. First, patients must present with clear symptoms. Besides irrational changes in one's behavior, including performing acts of violence and self-harm, there are some physical symptoms. The whites of the eyes may appear red, as in cases of conjunctivitis. The pupils will be excessively and constantly dilated. The patient's face will appear longer and darker than normal. So far, all of these symptoms are compatible with known physical and psychiatric ailments, but others stand out much more clearly. Some patients would display immense, inexplicable physical strength. Their voice may become unnaturally hoarse and deep. They will speak or understand languages previously unknown to them, such as Latin, ancient Greek, or Aramaic. They will react violently to the presence of sacred objects or the mention of religious figures. In extreme cases, just thinking about Jesus or Mary may throw patients into a fit of rage. If people carried these symptoms, Amort and Amentini would organize a prayer service with them known as a diagnostic exorcism. If patients were to react adversely, suggesting an actual possession, the exorcist would refer them to a medical team for further evaluation. This is a very important step, as Father Amort and all exorcists in general recognize the importance of proper psychiatric evaluation. If no medical remedy were found for the victim's suffering, then the priest would then decide whether to proceed with the exorcism and seek permission from his local bishop. By shadowing Amentini, Father Amort perfected his exorcism rites. According to Roman ritual, these must be conducted by a priest in Latin or another Vatican-approved language, while standing on sacred ground. The Roman ritual is rigidly codified. Priests are meant to follow a preordained sequence of prayers, psalms, and exhortations intended to expel demons from the host's body. Amort largely followed the ritual during his apprenticeship, but he eventually introduced some personal touches. For example, he always wore a purple stole, which he ensured was wrapped around both his and his patient's shoulders. He always made sure he was carrying holy water and bearing a medal of Saint Benedict of Nursia. The saint is mostly known for his lasting influence on monastic life and education, but he is also famous for defeating Satan on at least 3 occasions. Over time, Amort realized that more than 90% of his cases that made it to step 5 turned out not to be real possessions. That is why he developed a further screening method, which worked only once an exorcism was underway. Amort claims that during the ritual, many patients would close their eyes during specific prayers. In turn, Amort would have their eyelids forced open. In the case of real possessions, the eyes appeared completely white. In an interview with British broadcaster Giles Brandreth, Amort specified that if the pupils are completely rolled upwards, then the demons in possession are scorpions. If looking devils are completely rolled upwards, then the demons in possession are scorpions. If looking down, they are serpents. Brand is famous for defeating Satan on at least 3.
Alright, bro. Just let me look at something. When you were here before.
Occasions. Over time, Amort realized that more than 90% of his cases that made it to step 5 turned out not to be real possessions. That is why he developed a further screening method, which worked only once an exorcism was underway. Amort claims that during the ritual, many patients would close their eyes during specific prayers. In turn, Amort would have their eyelids forced open. In the case of real possessions, the eyes appeared completely white. In an interview with British broadcaster Giles Brandreth, Amort specified that if the pupils are completely rolled upwards, then the demons in possession are scorpions. If looking down, they are serpents. Amort did not elaborate on this distinction, but serpents or snakes are a common incarnation of Satan or his demons in Christian art and literature. Scorpion demons are more interesting, though, as they belong to the Mesopotamian mythology that predates any description of Judeo-Christian demons. It was a Mesopotamian demon, Pazuzu, that appeared as the main antagonist in the movie The Exorcist. After a period in which Father Amort closely shadowed his mentor, he finally had the chance to perform his first exorcism as the lead. This case related to a 14-year-old girl who, after attending a satanic ritual in central Rome, immediately presented with symptoms of possession. Her parents took her immediately to Amentini, but unfortunately the lead exorcist was ill. Amort stepped forward. In a rare instance of disobedience, he disregarded the discernment process and immediately started the ritual. In later interviews, he claimed that the girl was healed after one single session. He explains this by citing the immediacy of the exorcism, which had prevented the demon or spirit from taking root or burrowing inside the victim. This was an exception. In most cases, patients were taken to Amentini and Amort only after months of suffering from possession symptoms. According to Amort's new theory, this enabled invading spirits to settle inside the hosts. This demonic fortification required exorcisms to continue for multiple sittings, at least an hour long, over the span of months or even years, until a patient was eventually liberated. Is liberation a given? Father Amort became increasingly confident about his odds of victory with each passing exorcism. The teaching of Amentini was that regardless of their power, demons will ultimately succumb to the power of Christ if properly channeled through an exorcist. Father Amort once told journalists that the devil may win some battles, even important ones, but remember, he will never win the war. Father Amort indeed waged a constant war against the legions of hell. Since his appointment in 1986 until his death in 2016, the chief exorcist dealt with more than 300 cases of possession every year. That's a rough total of 10,000 alleged possessions, requiring him to perform about 70,000 exorcism sessions. However, Father Amort always admitted that the actual cases of demonic possession were in the hundreds, not in the thousands. In most cases, exorcism didn't work, and patients were referred back to psychiatric care and eventually cured by other means. In actual cases of possession, Father Amort estimated that 90% of them were due to the patient's exposure to a spell, a curse, or a satanic ritual. Amort acknowledges that most self-described witches, wizards, clairvoyants, or Satanist priests are harmless occult enthusiasts at best, or mundane scammers at worst. However, he believes that a small minority of them actually do have dark powers. So, what are the effects of confirmed possession on its victims? Well, let's take the example of one of Amort's youngest patients, a boy of 11. Halfway through the ritual, the boy, or the demon within, flew into such a fit of rage that he had to be restrained by 7 grown men, and even then the boy managed to send them flying through the room. Violent manifestations and attacks are not uncommon, which is why exorcists often deploy physical restraints. On one occasion, a patient succeeded in attacking Amort directly, delivering a kick so strong that it broke his leg. The priest had to wear a cast for a month. Most attacks directed at the priest take a different form, and that's spitting. This is a manifestation of the scorn and spite felt by demons against the exorcist and his prayers. In some cases, the projectile was more than just saliva. In one particularly tough ritual, Amort went to cover the patient's mouth while she was foaming and spitting, and when he retracted his hand, he said that he found it filled with metal nails. This was not surprising to Amort. Spitting, or simply producing metallic items in the patient's mouth, is a common trick used by devils to hurt and scare their victims. He recalled patients slowly ejecting from their mouth large metal spikes, shards of glass, or even a radio, which came out one piece at a time. During his career, Father Amort had frequently spoken about the film The Exorcist. While praising it for raising awareness about the practice of exorcism, he pointed out that the ritual used was not the correct one, and most of the symptoms displayed by the victim were exaggerated. No, the head can't spin 180 degrees, and no, people can't bend over backwards and walk around like spiders. However, victims can contort in unnatural ways, angles, and shapes, but they are unlikely to crawl like arachnids. How about green projectile vomiting? Well, vomiting does happen, but never with such force. And can patients levitate? Well, actually, Amort confirms that this does happen, although he only experienced it twice in 30 years. On another occasion, he witnessed something even more chilling. A possessed old lady was able to walk on walls like a reptile. And lastly, do patients' voices sound double, as though there is more than one entity within? Well, this could be the most interesting one of all. Amort always maintains that Satan or his demons do not like to talk. This is because they hate being detected. However, when they are discovered, they may engage in short dialogue with the exorcist, usually limited to verbal abuse or curt answers to the priest's questions. The entities may not reveal their name when questioned. If they do, they often claim to be Satan or Beelzebub. What they will easily reveal is how many of them there are within the host. Sometimes 3, 5, 7, perhaps even a legion of demons are within. Even then, though, double or multiple sounding voices is extremely rare, but not impossible. For a full account of the battles of Father Amort, I can only advise that you pick up one of the several books he published on his experiences, including An Exorcist Tells His Story, My Battle Against Satan, or Memoirs of an Exorcist. Now, it is fair to wonder if the exorcist-in-chief of the Vatican has ever felt fear during his daily occult struggles. Even if one does not believe in demons, we are still talking about confronting patients who are deeply disturbed and potentially dangerous, often several times a day. Journalists have asked him many times if he's scared of Satan, and his reply? Absolutely not. It is him who is afraid of me. Occult struggles, even if one does not believe in Satan or Memoirs of an Exorcist. Now, it is fair to wonder if the exorcist-in-chief of the Vatican has ever felt fear during his daily occult struggles. Even if one does not believe in demons, we are still talking about confronting patients who are deeply disturbed and potentially dangerous, often several times a day. Journalists have asked him many times if he's scared of Satan, and his reply? Absolutely not. It is him who is afraid of me. Father Amort has always had an open and positive relationship with the press, a channel that he sees as important in raising awareness of exorcism. He believed that prior to the three most recent popes, Vatican leadership had not done enough to support exorcism in the public consciousness. It is perceived as an ancient and outdated practice of the church rather than a noble, very real fight against the devil. Amort has never been shy about his critical view of top church officials either. He has accused them of trying to replace the Roman ritual of exorcisms with less powerful variations and of trying to ban diagnostic exorcisms, a key step in the discernment process. In 2012, Father Amort successfully prevented both changes from taking effect. 2 years later, he scored another victory, receiving an official acknowledgement from the Vatican for the International Association of Exorcists, which he had co-founded in 1990. These conflicts with the Vatican have been exacerbated by a series of interviews in the 2000s in which Father Amort stated that the Holy See had been infiltrated by demons and that the series of church sex scandals could be attributed to satanic influence or downright possession. Amort had partially toned down these claims before his death, stating that cardinals and other leaders were not immune from temptations brought forward by Satan, who was more active than ever in his fight against Catholicism. It must be said that Amort did not pull any punches when it came to accusing pretty much everything and everyone of being an ally of evil. He went as far as calling yoga a satanic practice, and he says in 2012, Father Amort successfully prevented both changes from taking effect. 2 years later, he scored another victory, receiving an official acknowledgement from the Vatican for the International Association of Exorcists, which he had co-founded in 1990. These conflicts with the Vatican have been exacerbated by a series of interviews in the 2000s in which Father Amort stated that the Holy See had been infiltrated by demons and that the series of church sex scandals could be attributed to satanic influence or downright possession. Amort had partially toned down these claims before his death, stating that cardinals and other leaders were not immune from temptations brought forward by Satan, who was more active than ever in his fight against Catholicism. It must be said that Amort did not pull any punches when it came to accusing pretty much everything and everyone of being an ally of evil. He went as far as calling yoga a satanic practice, as according to him, it is linked to Eastern religions, which are sometimes centered around the belief of reincarnation. Perhaps his best-known target is the Harry Potter franchise. In his view, the wizarding world described by J.K. Rowling encourages children to believe in black magic and to distance themselves from Christian prayer. However, instead of denting his popularity, these controversies have contributed to Father Amort becoming the most famous living Catholic exorcist. And so it was only a matter of time before he came face to face with the man behind the most famous fictional exorcist. In 2016, filmmaker William Friedkin, director of The Exorcist, interviewed Father Amort for Vanity Fair. Friedkin took the occasion to ask permission to join the priest in one of his exorcism sessions. His footage of the exorcism of a young woman called Christina formed the backbone of Friedkin's latest release, the documentary The Devil and Father Amort. When Friedkin met Amort, he had been exorcising Christina for 9 months. It all began with another patient, a woman in her 30s whose name has never been revealed. After a long depression, she was found one day by her brother Paolo, writhing on the floor, her twisting body shaken by convulsions. According to witnesses, she would be found howling like a wolf and crawling on walls like a snake. This state continued for several days, and a psychiatrist was not able to help. Amort took charge, and the patient was healed after 4 sessions. Following the experience, Paolo became one of Father Amort's most trusted assistants. And it was Paolo who, years later, met Christina at Mass, and he noticed how she looked distressed, disorientated, and disturbed. Paolo brought her case to Amort's attention. According to Amort, Christina's able to help. Amort took charge, and the patient was healed after 4 sessions. Following the experience, Paolo became one of Father Amort's most trusted assistants. And it was Paolo who, years later, met Christina at Mass, and he noticed how she looked distressed, disorientated, and disturbed. Paolo brought her case to Amort's attention. According to Amort, Christina's brother and his girlfriend were members of a satanic cult, and they may have caused Christina's plight after performing an occult ritual. Whatever the cause, it was clear to him that Christina needed his help. After following the discernment procedure, the priest started to exorcise her in August of 2015. Friedkin was allowed to film the 9th exorcism session in early 2016. Clips of the exorcism session are available on YouTube. And for the most part, I'll leave it for you to make your own conclusion. I'll just comment on a couple of things. First, it's remarkable just how calm and unfazed Father Amort appears. In one clip, he thumbs his nose at the demon inside Christina. And although the subtitles miss this, my Italian researcher assures me that he tells the entity to "Shut up, you ain't worth a cigarette butt." You may also notice Christina's behavior. She appears to be in a trance-like state, but she is alert and reactive to Amort's ritual. Very reactive. As she thrashes about on her chair or attempts to attack the priest, she is barely held down by 2 well-built men. Then, as Amort orders the demon to leave Christina's body in Latin, the patient replies in Latin, "Never." According to Friedkin, Christina had never studied Latin at school. Finally, when Amort asks how many demons there are, Christina's voice turns different. She has been growling and snarling all through the clip, but at this point her voice sounds double, as if many voices speak from within. She first answers 80 leaders, and later, "We are armies, armies, armies." Then Amort concludes the ritual with a sign of the cross. Amort later confided to Friedkin that this case was particularly unsettling. During a previous session, Christina's entity had recited back to Father Amort all his past sins. This was something that only the exorcist and his father confessor could know. Amort and Christina were due to meet again to conclude the exorcism, but her family kept postponing appointments. Friedkin saw Christina and her relatives again in August, but was threatened with legal action if he divulged the footage. Their concern was that making it public would spread Satan's work. As Friedkin brushed off the threats, Christina's family cut ties with both the filmmaker and Amort. Unfortunately, the chief exorcist would not have been able to complete his work with Christina, even if he was able to. Already in poor health throughout the summer, Father Amort contracted pneumonia and was hospitalized at the beginning of September. At the age of 91, Father Gabriele Amort died from complications of pneumonia on September the 16th, 2016. According to his assistant, he remained alert and jovial to the last moment, often removing his oxygen mask to blow raspberries at visiting friends whenever they started crying. So, is any of this real? So far, I have presented possession and exorcism from the point of view of Amort. Do I believe that demons and spirits can invade and control an individual? Well, let's just say I'm not going to answer that. What I will choose to highlight is the perspective of medicine and
Why is she a rare species?